Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer. Howdie McCoskey and Michael Wan are here with me, and this is the real Trilateral Commission. This is episode number 4. We've completed one full cycle with the last episode, so today we're starting the second cycle, and Michael is the selector of the article. And before he tells us sort of how he kind of like set us off on a new path in terms of the kind of articles we're choosing and then the article he chose. So before he tells us about that, though, let's check in and see how our friends are doing. Howdy, Michael, how you guys doing this morning?
I am doing very well, but you planted a little seed in my head when you said the real Trilateral Commission, because I sometimes forget that's what we call this, and I forget how much I like that. And then I was like, oh, well, what about the fake Trilateral Commission? And then I realized, I bet you they've got better snacks than we do. I bet you, like, at their meetings, their snacks are better, maybe their coffee's better. And so, like, you know, I don't want to start off on that comparison foot, but that's what happened. That's what happened. I'm thinking about snacks.
All right. Well, I love snacks. And since we don't have any snacks at all involved in our meeting here, they by default have better snacks. But one of the things that you probably have some awareness about this, but you haven't really figured out yet because you haven't spent time with me in like the real physical world, is that snacks are very important to me. I have 2 rules for life, and one of them is everything must be yummy, right? So my coffee is wonderful, and I'm into snacks. So if we ever have the occasion to like have a sit down in the same actual room, not the Zoom room, and have a real meeting of the minds here, the real Trilateral Commission, I promise wonderful coffee and snacks. All
right. So you got me hooked, and you said the 2. So, or the 3 things. So it's like, I've got 2 things. Like, one is the fundamental truth is that at the core of the human experience, it is a mystery. And number 2, it's that snacks matter. So we're completely aligned on that. Those are the fundamental truths of being alive. Yes. Now, Howdy, we haven't heard from you yet. Let's hear. Let me hear your calming your voice, because I need to bring myself down.
Be happy we're talking today. If we were talking on Tuesday, I wouldn't have been so calm. It's been a challenging few days in my world, and I didn't have many snacks during that period either. So maybe that's the link right there.
Yeah, snacks are important, dude. Like, life is really just what happens between yummy things you eat. So like when I'm going on a vacation or anything, even just going somewhere besides my normal routine for the day, the way I sort of plot out how things will work is which restaurants we're going to eat at. And then everything else fills in between there. And I enforce that structure.
Are you a Taurus?
No, she is a Taurus. I'm a Cancer. So I'm very concerned with my stomach.
Yeah, gotcha.
Howdy, what type of snacks do they eat in Norway?
Ooh.
Fish, right? Raw.
I don't know. I don't think they would eat. Unfortunately, now it's the same as in North America.
It's the same as everywhere. Okay. That's fair. But
that's the big deal. When I first came here for my first trip, we're getting out of the rambling on, but when I first came here in 2005, the population was really in shape. Like, it didn't matter where you looked, the people looked healthy and, you know, relatively thin. When 10 years later, the influx of what you call a North American snack diet, they've exploded.
Literally and figuratively. I'm of Norwegian stock, so I know that.
Now maybe it's because we can eat some snacks and we have sports background, so we have a certain way of knowing when to stop that others don't.
You may be onto something.
Or we actually know the exact amount of exercises that is necessary to offset said snack, right? So I just, when I think of like, okay, what would I think of as Norwegian food? Lox came to my mind, right? Norwegian lox is a thing, isn't that? They do their own smoking of salmon there. They have their style that they do it. Isn't that a thing?
Yeah, there's not really anything too traditional that you should want to try before you die.
Gotcha. All right.
Howdy, you should be hired for the Norwegian Tourist Board, and you'll do a commercial. There's nothing really you want to know about here.
They got some nice fjords. It's really,
bring your own food. You definitely want to bring your own food. But it's just like what they sell here, because it's all the North American diet. Can I say one last thing about snacks before we move on to the purpose? So
Yeah.
I live here in central Pennsylvania. Central Pennsylvania, unless you live like in central Maryland or central New York, you probably never even heard of central Pennsylvania. But central Pennsylvania is the epicenter of the American snack industry. So things like Hers potato chips, Utz pretzels, Hanover pretzels, like all of the grocery store brands, like not the Frito-Lay, that's like further down the line. That's further down the line. It all began here. But I think I might be the exception because it's not particularly as the snack food capital, or at least the snack food birthplace of North America. I'm one of the few that still has a svelte, girlish figure. Okay.
So, and I happen to live in like the sort of keto carnivore, what do they call them? Superfood snack capital of the world. Like a lot of those companies are here in Austin, right? Like if you like Picnic and what is that, Wild Foods and things like that, that make, you know, stuff that you buy in like online health food snack places, that's here. So, you know, what about, yeah, and Howdie's just like, yeah.
And Howdie's like, I don't even eat the fish. I won't
My
even
snacks
eat.
are berries, you know, like.
Oh, I like, yeah, there we go.
Old school. All right, hats off. Hats off to that one.
All right,
right.
boys, get ready. It's going to be quite a show today.
Michael, bring us in. Let us know.
All right.
How you decided where we were going with this new cycle of stories, and then tell us about your story. And then
All right. So I just want to let Laura know, who's keeping score at home, that the introduction of how we came to this story should not be included in my 20 minutes presentation. All right, thumbs up. So this is it. So it was Monday morning. I knew it was my time to pick the story. And how we normally do this is 3 days prior to our presentation, we take turns picking it, who's going to do the story. And we go to like a mainstream news source or aggregator. And you know, you just kind of like, you go with it. You're like, you know, what's my instinct? And so this is my second time around. This is our 4th episode, correct? So I picked the first one. So I go and I look and I go to Drudge Report. That's my fallback. That's aggregator of mainstream news. And the headline story on Monday was like the first Olympic trans athlete is named. And I was like, I don't want to do that. Everyone's doing that. Like, you know, it's like, it's a marker. I definitely think it's an interesting marker and an interesting conversation, but I'm like, that's not it. So I go and I scroll through, and Monday was a wild day for me. I didn't have much time. And I just looked at the headlines, and there was a headline which was about the circus. And I was like, all right, this for whatever reason, like my internal alarm said like ding, 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 ding. So I'm like, all right, this is it. I clicked on the article. I just kind of like scanned it for like 20 seconds or so forth. I'm like, this will work. And I sent you guys the link. And then I put it to bed. I'm like, you know what? I've got a bunch going on, and I'm not going to be able to look at this until like kind of the last minute, not until the last minute. So here it is. It's called The Disappearance of the Circus from American Life Leaves Us Lonelier. That's the name of the article. And this was on the Washington Post. This was a Washington Post opinion piece. I mean, realistically, all of it is opinion piece because it's made to shape your opinion. But this one, at least they have the courage to say that like, this is just an opinion, but that's that's on the side. That's a different comment. So I pick the article, I put it aside. I'm like, I know there's going to be something good in there. And then I go and read it. And I'm like, what the hell did I just select? There's absolutely nothing in this story. Like, and so like, I'm starting like, and I still got all this stuff going on, like, you know, which I have to do. I'm like, I don't want to go too deep on this. Like, where am I going to go? Where am I going to go? So Laura, we can begin the 20 minutes now. So now we're going to move into the story. So I read it over a couple times, and it's turned out to be what I think is a pretty interesting storyline, which we're going to go with. So is this where I begin? I think this is it. All right. So the first thing we want to point out is Washington Post. We know what the Washington Post is. You know, before it became a Bezos tool, we know its role with the CIA and all that sort of stuff. And it would be foolish to think that its role has changed just because of its supposed ownership has changed. I mean, that's my personal opinion. So this is an op-ed piece, and it came out on Monday, and it makes no friggin' sense. And the reason why it makes no sense is usually when you're going to have an op-ed piece, it's going to have like a trigger from something which is happening in the now. Like, okay, this event occurred and now I'm going to write my opinion about it. But this is about the disappearance of the circus. And there's no kind of like, nothing has happened in the mainstream world which really kind of triggered this. And it goes through in the article, you know, it kind of talks about the history of the circus within the United States. And it tells you right here, it says like the very last show of the circus industry, which he's talking about, occurred in May 2017. So it's like, you know, it's in the language of the article itself, or the piece itself, that yeah, this isn't about anything which is happening right now, but it's two things occurred. One, it's in the Washington Post, which is a very mainstream, influential media piece. And of all of the thousands of stories which are out there, the Drudge Report selected this to be on, like, I don't know, there might be like 50 stories at any given time that are listed on Drudge Report. So this story jumped through two rings, if you will, in order to get into this placement. So I'm like, all right, there's something here. What is it? So on the first level, so we'll go with the first level. Where are we? So what the article is like, this is another, what I would categorize as a demoralization piece to the American psyche, to anyone who's going to go and read this story on, like, what you see is what you get reality. Like, this is just what it's about. Because what the op-ed piece is saying is like, it's like, hey, the circuses used to be awesome. And what they did for the American people was it told them that anything was possible. Because when you go to the circus, you're going to see the most outrageous things you've never seen before. And you're going to be inspired to go out and live the American dream. And now it's dead. And now there's no inspiration. And now it's like, guess what? It's all over. And it kind of goes on with it. He talks about it like one cultural critic. So on one hand, the author kind of like builds up the circus, and then he tells us that they're all gone. And he's saying how the circus was this long success of the circus, even after like the advent of like radio and television and movies, was that its ability to wrap up the American experience. So this is how they're defining the American experience. You know, exoticism, supreme athleticism, life and death drama, everything that we find entertaining in a space of an afternoon. So they're saying like all of this sort of stuff is kind of gone, as we're just like that era has come to an end. And then it ends with this line, and that not only reduces a sense of community, but it also the ability to turn to the neighbor and share the wonder, did that really happen? So I thought that was really kind of interesting way to encloses it. And so what he says is, because of the new technology, and it's hinted at like all of the new like norms due to social distancing and don't trust your neighbor and all that sort of stuff, like it's all gone. Like, you know, we used to go to the circus. It was a community event. We talked about it, encapsulated the American story, but now we're all lonely. We don't have anyone to share it with. All of our experiences happen in our phone and all of this. So that's what I mean by like kind of the like it being a demoralization piece. Like there's no inspiration and now you're lonely. So that's, you know, that's the feel good story of the day from the Washington Post. But that's just like the first read. That's like the story for you know, whoever's going to read this on that what you see, what you get level. But that's not the three of us, my friends. So what really jumped out after like reading it a second time, the line that jumped out to me in the direction which I decided to go, because I read it and I like kind of went down a couple different directions. Like, do I want to go down this? I'm like, do I want to go down that lane? But this is the one where I decided to go. So,
oh man.
well, let's see if we go in the same place. I mean, there's really not much to choose from. So it is, the circus's development paralleled the nation's growth. Yes, it was a diversion, but one that also became a portable manifestation of the American dream. And then he quotes novelist Hamlin Garland, who wrote this in 1899. To go from the lonely prairie or the dusty cornfield and come face to face with the amazing aggregation of worldwide wonders was like enduring the visions of the apocalypse, a glittering river of Elysian splendors emptying itself into the tent. I'm like, what the hell does that mean? Like, what? Well, first of all, like the author of the op-ed did not write this. This is of all of the quotes which about circuses which he could find. This was the one which he chose to embed in his, like, you know, in his Washington Post piece, which probably has multiple purposes. And so he uses this thing. It's like this quote, this idea of the apocalypse, of the end of the age. You know, he's putting that in there, and it's also in the. This is a little bit like on a deeper level of like the subliminal of the story, but like the overall positioning of this op-ed piece is like, you know, it's the end, you know, there's nothing to do except for be lonely and not be inspired. And then he's telling us, like, he's adding in this, the visions of the apocalypse. He's putting that into the mind of the reader. But it, you know, that this quote doesn't even make sense to me, because why would going from a dusty cornfield and coming into like the excitement of the circus be like the enduring visions of the apocalypse? Like, I mean, I guess I can kind of see it like in these like crazy sort of things, but still it's unusual. So that to me, and that's kind of like one of my one of my viewpoints of looking at the unfolding of life in this time is like, you know, we're watching the collapse of one age. We're watching the collapse of one timeline, whatever we want to say it, and it's all engineered. And we're seeing the birth of the new one, and it's like, you know, this is what it looks like. So I decided to look into the author. I just assumed he was a Washington Post like employee, but the author here, the Les Standiford, he is not. And he is an author, and is since 1985 has been the founding director of Florida International University Creative Programming. And he also holds a chair at the Eckerd College in St. Petersburg, Florida. And so as soon as I read that, because like, you know, I'm going to jump now into a little bit synchromistic, I'm like, okay, I've got a personal connection to this. This is going to go personal to me because my sister's married to another faculty member at Eckerd College. And so Eckerd College isn't a big school. And so like, I'm like, all right, there's a real personal, I know that I have a personal link into this storyline. So we go through this and talks a little bit about like, you know, some of the books he's written and all this sort of stuff. We look at his personal life, and it says that his wife is Kimberly Kurzweil Standiford. And so she's got a hyphened last name. She kept her maiden name, Kurzweil. And so we touch into like Ray Kurzweil and like, you know, transhumanism. And like, again, we're dealing with the end of the age, all this sort of stuff. I wasn't able to confirm nor deny if there was a relationship, if she has like if this woman, Kimberly Kurzweil Standiford, is related to Ray Kurzweil. My sense is probably not, because if you go and you look into Ray Kurzweil's like biography, like his childhood and his family life is always completely omitted from it, besides like a sentence or two. So I don't know who or what this guy is, but nonetheless, they share that last name. They share that last name. So I'm like, okay, this is kind of like peppered into the backdrop of the story. And then we go and we look at this Les Standiford's his education, you know, this all from like, you know, the wiki page, which I find is like one of the best ways of like looking at what's presented. It's the best. It's the friggin' best. It's one of their gifts. And it talks about The last thing, well, one is that he attended the Air Force Academy. You know, he's well indoctrinated / educated in the system. And he is a former screenwriting fellow at the American Film Institute in Los Angeles. And I could be totally wrong with this because I'm not in the industry, but I would imagine that if you're going to go and become a fellow at the American Film Institute, that you have to be pretty good, or at least you have a biography. You have a biography which is going to go and justify, like, oh, this is why this guy's a fellow, and like maybe he does. I just did the wiki background and like a couple other bios, but like this is what his film credits are. He's got Bones of Coral, and then he's got the movie Virus. Ding, 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 ding. Now we've got another one of these, like, you know, timeliness. So these are his 2 screenplays, which got him, like, you know, he's got all of these like really, really cushy jobs, like in terms of like mainstream living. Like, this is what you want. You want to be a tenured professor. You want to write a book here and there. You get, like, you know, an op-ed piece to rewrite at the Washington Post, and, you know, you're a fellow at, you know, that is the American dream, if you will, on a certain level. So okay, so let's go look at this virus thing. So he originally wrote this book, Spill, which came out in 91. And then it's, you know, kind of virusy, kind of like CIA-ish, whatever. We got all that sort of stuff. And they made this really bad movie in 1996, which starred the Boz. If anyone who remembers who the Boz is. Yep. So this was one of his like theatrical contributions to the culture. So, okay, so we've got that, and I'm like, all right, we've got a little bit of this timeliness. We got Virus in there. We got Kurzweil. We've got all this sort of stuff. And I look at his other books. So he wrote this. He wrote this one book called Spill. But all of his other books and what he was known for are both nonfiction, and then his fictional books have a recurring character, John Deal. And the only ones of his fiction books which are not John Deal fall underneath this virus sort of thing. So a lot of his other books, when you go and you look, you see that they have within them a subplot of CIA. We've got this here in Spill. We've got CIA, Deal with the Dead, CIA. He wrote this nonfiction book, Palm Beach, Mar-a-Lago, and the Rise of America's Xanadu. CIA, Naked Came the Manatee. So we see CIA all over the place. I included this one in for you, Emily. So I just wrote his name in CIA, and this came on the list. And it's for a link from the University of Texas at Austin website, and it's former CIA agents, and then they include a novel of Les Standiford. So we've got like all the CIA stuff. It always goes back to the CIA for me, I suppose. All right, so then I'm like, all right, well, where the hell is this going to take me? Remember, this is just popping in my mind like no more than 2 or 3 hours ago. So then I go and I type in CIA Circus. And so then now we hit pay dirt. Now we hit pay dirt, my friends. So the CIA, if you're familiar with the told us history of the CIA and Tibet, it was run underneath a program which was known as Circus. And there was what we see right here, the code names of the different clandestine operations was ST Circus, ST Barnum, and Bailey. And this all has to do with you know, Tibet and, you know, the Dalai Lama and all this sort of stuff. So we've got these connections. And if you remember where I began this little journey was I said that I know that this is going to have a personal connection to me because of this. You know, this is Mike's logic. You know, for whatever you want to think about it, this is how Mike navigates reality from just things like this. So I knew right now that somehow this is going to come back personally to me, and this is where it comes back. Not that I'm in the CIA, not that I came from Tibet, but the very fact of the matter is, I've been reading this book. In fact, I haven't stopped reading this book. It's really only like 80 pages. I've read it 3 times in the last month. I've never read a book 3 times. I can't stop reading it. I don't know why, but it keeps bringing me back. So let me tell you what the name of the book is. The name of the book is called A Story Waiting to Pierce You: Mongolia, Tibet, and the Destiny of the Western World. And it's written by Peter Kingsley. And this book was a gift to me like 2 months ago. I think I've talked about this with you, Emily, before. Like I went on this tour with Ross Ben, and this guy goes, and it was a wild tour with weird, like Rosicrucian, on all sorts of stuff. And on that tour, someone gave me this book, and, you know, I've been reading it ever since. So I'm going to conclude my presentation. I'm going to read 2 passages from this book. And I think that, you know, maybe I got my 5 minutes, so this is perfect. So, all right, so where to begin? Hopefully I can cover, I've got like about 4 pages to read. But really, this is not hard to understand. And the reason for such a peculiar state of affairs is that the tulkas are no longer just living incarnations of compassionate wisdom. They also have become the quintessential embodiment of Tibetan Buddhism in all its absolute, its total uniqueness, or so we're supposed to believe. The exotic reality of reincarnating tulkas and associated in our minds almost exclusively with the dazzling mystery of the Dalai Lama. But in the history of Tibet, even Buddhist Tibet, the Dalai Lamas are only a recent phenomenon. And much further back in time, towards the remotest origins of Tibetan Buddhism, lies something else, something we can comment on, notice the effects of, but which in itself will always remain a secret wrapped inside layers of silence. Right at its dawn, its mythical beginnings, the introducers of the new religion used the power of the ancient shamans to overcome the shamans, to destroy them, pin them down. Far from simply being importers of some Indian wisdom, they were shown how to use the shaman's magic to take away their magic by taking over their traditions, renaming them, and making them their own. And the shamans themselves were given a choice: forget or convert, run or die. This is how the story began, and is how it would continue century after century. And when eventually a Tibetan monk managed to make his way out of the lands of the Mongols, in 1578, after months of trudging, he would end up digging the ancient pattern even deeper. The formalities of this meeting on June 19th, which with the great ruler known as Altan Khan, were framed by an almost perfect symmetry. The monk gave Altan Khan a special honorary title, and in exchange, he became the first Tibetan to receive the Mongolian title, Dalai Lama. Altan Khan acknowledged the Dalai Lama as a tulka, and the Dalai Lama recognized Altan Khan as a tulka too, as the reincarnation of Kublai Khan, belonging in an unbroken line extending back to Genghis Khan himself. The great Khan asked some special favors of a religious nature, and in return, the new Dalai Lama asked one particular favor of the Khan. This was that he wipe out every single trace of shamanism among his Mongol people, smash and burn their sacred instruments, exterminate their practices, silence their songs, and annihilate any shaman stupid enough to resist. Soon, with the assistance of Mongol troops, sometimes lining the streets to keep order in Lhasa, the Dalai Lamas had become rulers over a whole country. With their newfound power, they could easily afford to be generous by offering support to the Naqshbandi Sufis who arrived at Lhasa from Central Asia asking for help with their struggles against the Naqshbandi Sufis. But closer to home, most people were a little less fortunate. Over the centuries across Mongolia, as well as Tibet, orders for extending the persecution and extermination of shamans were not just issued with the new ruler's silent approval. On the contrary, the instructions came straight from the Dalai Lama's own mouths and hands, along with the practice of revising the past, rewriting history, modifying the course of events that had already taken place. And now, in these very different times, the sincerest messages of kindness and nonviolence, of spiritual oneness and global peace are almost let at it all fall away, to erase any remaining memories of those forced conversions, mass murders, communities and traditions destroyed, of people's lands being seized from them, together with anything else that they could name, until they no longer remembered who or what they were, and of the silent songs that, if they had never happened to be heard of, still had the power to take your heart away. But even so, in spite of everything, we can still manage to trace back step by step the origins of the famous Tulka institution to where it really comes from, back beyond the Buddhism's dramatic appearance on the stage and to the ancient shamanic practices of Tibet and Central Asia. Of course, nowadays, wherever you look, you will find hardly a word said of any of this. But the reason for such silence is not any lack of solid evidence. Evidence still accessible in the annals of the old Tibetan kings or the records of the first Buddhist tulkas ever to leave their mark across Tibet and among the Mongols. Along the Silk Road, around the great deserts of the Tameran Basin stretching up above Tibet towards the Atal Mountains. Quite the contrary, it is simply due to the spell of forgetfulness cast over the whole matter so many hundred years ago. And so I'm going to read one more part and then I'll be done.
10 seconds. 10 seconds.
10 seconds. I'm going to go 3 minutes over. I'm sorry. I just got them. And then I'll stop. Oh, or maybe I'll just do. And there are those who quietly go about doing whatever is needed. Those that wait in a state of ecstasy, helping to bring new civilizations into being, the ones without whom nothing is possible. But not only are these people needed to bring the new worlds into existence, they are needed to bring them to an end, so to make way for the new. The simple truth is that every single civilization, including the Western world, was brought into being from a sacred place to serve a sacred purpose. And when that purpose is forgotten, when its original alignment gets lost, when the fundamental balance and harmony of its existence become disrupted beyond a certain point, then nature has her way. This is the mystery of birth and death, not only for humans, but for cultures too. And for the thousands of years, it has been understood that just as civilizations have to come to an end, there can even be times of global extinctions. But there are always those people who know how to gather the essence of life and hold it safely, protect it and nurture it until the next seeding. I had a little bit more I want to read, but I'm going to stop right now. And so to me, that is what this is all about. That story is, yes, it's a social demoralization talking about the end of this particular time. And yes, there's a certain agenda, but it is pointing to a truth that this is the end of a time. And this comes back to the story, which I happen to be reading at the time, which goes on and on about the mystery going back to the Mongolian shamans, because that's what this book is all about, that this modus operandi of destroying history and forgetting who we are to rebirth another one is seemingly part of this dance that we're doing on this earth. So it is that, with that, my friends, I place the stick back in the middle.
And just quickly before Howdie goes, somehow there was some mysterious happening here and this clock got stopped at some point. So you got extra minutes. Right, you probably had about 8 minutes instead of 5, Michael, and you needed them because that was fascinating. So,
what's even more crazy is my watch stopped working a month ago, and it started working again last night. Well, so time is playing. Okay.
All right, Howdie, take it away.
I just thought, though, curious before we move on, for Laura, did Michael's reading influence you from what we talked about earlier?
Totally.
Yeah.
It totally did. I'm like, wow, this just plays right into what my conversation with Howdie earlier. And I, maybe I need to get this book and read it.
There you go.
So Howdie is now in many ways, but just provided another bead for our game, Michael, and on we go.
Certainly so.
Okay, well, I think I'm going to keep mine very brief because I just wanted to present some ideas and let us all talk about them. A few little segments of where this article took me. Okay,
Wait,
circus. Okay.
So you're responding to Michael's presentation right now, right?
Oh, right.
Yes. Okay. Do your response
Yeah.
to Michael's. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just, yeah, it was like I had no idea where you were going to take it, actually, because I had no idea where I was going to take it, and I'm so used to you finding a location and then a map and I'm like, well, what map is he going to get? Did you? I'm curious. Did you actually think about a location first when you did? No, so that was totally. This was like totally different for you. That was my question.
That is, yes. Well, I mean, we do maps a lot in our conversation here, but that, you know, I'm like a two-trick pony. Like, you know, like one trick is maps, and then I got another trick up my sleeve too.
All right. So did you have anything that you wanted to say into about some of the things he presented, Howdie?
I think the first thing would be, I was really surprised I didn't look at the author of the article like you did, which is the #1 useful thing I got out of university, which is don't read a book until you figure out who the author was and why he or she may have written it. And so as soon as you did that, I did one of these. Why didn't I do that? Why didn't I look into that? So that's a good reminder how easy it is to forget really important pieces of research, which is always who is presenting what it is you're looking at.
Absolutely.
I really like that play of words, how easy it is. I just remembered how easy it is to forget.
Yep. That's pretty perfect. There you go. All right. So is that all, Howdie? That was kind of impression. That's perfect. How easy it is to forget, I think, sums up what Michael said. But since you mentioned college, I'm going to say college too. And with that presentation that you did, Michael, you managed to generate more pages of notes than I wrote in my entire college career. So I will buzz through them now since Howdie kept it short and sweet. All right, here we go. So the first thing is, you were like, the choices were like the trans athlete at the Olympics or the circus story, right? And I'd say that they're kind of the same, because having a trans athlete at the Olympics is kind of like the bearded lady at the circus or the carnival, right? And so that was like the first thing that I thought. So these two stories are sort of connected. We don't need the circus anymore. I mean, you think of the Olympics as like some combination between like the gladiator games and the bread and circus, right? And so now it's just the Olympics are the circus. There we go. It's the bearded lady. We have a circus every day, right? And then there was something in there about May 2017 was the last circus performance. That was also when a new series of the Strange Suicides was kicked off with Chris Cornell that led into the Eclipse season, that had a whole other series of suicides that involved a red scarf, which is also sort of like what you see at the circus when they're doing some of their stuff, like they use the little stick and they use the scarf and whatnot. So if that was kind of an induction into something that was Eclipse season there. Okay, I think that like you highlighted a part of the article where it's like people getting together and commenting like, did I just see that? Like these fantastic things. And now weird things happen every day, but we're by ourselves. They don't want us talking about the weird things happen, like things that don't make sense. You and I recount these constantly in our synchronicities and things that seem to cross over from what's supposed to be the separate like computer world into what's supposed to be our natural world. But there's this bleed over, right? But we're not sitting together talking about it unless you and I and you know, whatever in our groups. Okay. So that was interesting. And then you highlighted in an part of the article that I was going to talk about as well, and I still will in my own way, but they were quoting somebody named Ernest Albrecht. Right. And I thought that was kind of an interesting name, Ernest Albrecht. It made me immediately think of There was a play that my cousin was in that was a famous play called The Importance of Being Earnest. I don't know why. And then Catherine Albrecht was someone who used to present information in the alternative media, who talked about sort of this bleed over of technology into our natural world and the confusing layers of it. And I don't know what happened to her. I know she had breast cancer. I haven't heard her name mentioned in a long time, but those two things.
Spy chips. She wrote Spy Chips, right?
Yes, yes. Okay. So anyway, and then the next funny name, and I'm going to talk about this in my presentation too separately, was Hamlin Garland. These are both unusual names. Hamlin Garland made me think of a couple of things. Harry Hamlin, right? The actor from LA Law, that's obvious last name. But then it also made me think of Dorothy Hamill, Scott Hamilton. We talked about Kim Hamilton, my Hamilton person, and the Hamilton watch. For, you know, how you and I work, it's like, if it sounds like something, it's that. Like, we don't need everything to be sort of exact. And then Judy Garland, right? And if you think of like ice skaters and blah, 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 and Judy Garland, Wizard of Oz, it's like part of like the Ice Capades is kind of like the circus, and Wizard of Oz is kind of like the circus. So that name sort of invokes that kind of like experience, right? And so I thought that was interesting. But then one of the ways that was talked about in that little clip that you had from Hamlin Garland made it almost seem like the circus was a traumatic experience, right? And if you think about it, there was always, when you went to the circus as a kid, that one kid who was crying when he saw the clown and was like literally, traumatized by what he had seen. And we think of the circus as entertainment, but was it also like in some ways some type of like passive trauma for us, right? That sort of like opened up this space of like what we're willing to accept and just consider normal, right? So that, and then let's see, the Kurzweil transhumanism thing was interesting, right? Like, and there's some stuff that keeps coming up in this that makes me think about this was like part of the uploading into the new VR that we find ourselves in right now, or the augmented reality game. And so that Kurzweil pops up there. And then like, he went to the Air Force Academy, right? And it wasn't there Air Force connections in the Bob Ross story. So at this point of your presentation, I started thinking this is connected to the Bob Ross thing. Like that article was like incredibly long and detailed and full of nonsense. And this was a pretty short article, but it evoked some of the same like vision, like sort of like tone for me, right? And then you talked about the movie Virus, and it was based after the book Spill. And right now we're being told that now it's not a naturally occurring virus. This happens from a lab leak, which is another way of saying spill, right? So we have the spill creating the virus, and they're getting into talking about, in the book, it's set in Yellowstone. And I think that area came up a lot in the Bob Ross stuff as well. And then you go to the CIA, so the Bob Ross again, right? Then you bring up CIA circus stuff. And just so you know, the first conversation I ever had with our mutual friend, Jesse, he started talking to me about the Barnum and Bailey Circus and some connection he sees to something in his background or whatever, and Alice Bailey, right? So that was the first conversation I ever had was
Bailey. I never thought of Alice Bailey.
It was about Barnum and Bailey Circus and Alice Bailey and whatnot. So that was our first thing. And then you got into this Saint Circus, Saint this, Saint that. As being CIA programs. Last night when I was listening to Jerry and Nish, they were talking about some patent for some sort of teleportation device, and the creator of it was named Saint Clair, right? And so that just, I saved that little article that they put in the chat room to read for a show I'm going to do this week, but it connected some weird things for me that I'll go into further later. But so this Saint stuff, this Saint something or other seems to be CIA codes that also that we need to look into, which is not the way I've looked into names of projects and programs before. So that was interesting. And then you get into Tibet, and just in the we're watching Twin Peaks right now. In the last episode of Twin Peaks that we watched, Agent Cooper, and I was telling you this about how he was talking about owls when he fell down, he got shot. There was 3 things that the interdimensional told him, and one of them was about owls. Then after this happened, like when Cooper was laying there thinking he was starting to think he was going to die, he like started talking about how he would love to like see Tibet free, or like go to Tibet or something. Tibet was in Twin Peaks, like this weird twilighty language kind of part talking about Tibet. I just did a show with Eric Peterson the other day, who's part of the Project Kids group, Michael, and he had this very interesting story about a vision he had when he was doing research on llamas and the sort of weird processes that they do, right? And I thought that was interesting. But then you said June 19th was an important date in there. And June 19th this year was really focused on, because all of a sudden our attention is being drawn to Juneteenth, right? To Juneteenth. And part of what's going on with Juneteenth here is the SJWs are the new Dalai Lamas, right? And the rewriting of history is happening through the 1619 Project and the CRT, critical race theory, and the rewriting of history and whatnot. And then you mentioned something about the Silk Road, and we have, of course, the Silk Road, whose creator is in prison with the controversy around that, named Ross Albrecht again, right? And my cousin, listen to this, my cousin who was in the play Importance of Being Earnest, his name is Michael Ross. And Bob Ross, Michael Ross, Ross Albrecht, Catherine, right? So there's this funny name play of names in there that seem like these, I don't know, these are just what pop up, they ping, right? So that's kind of what I have to say in response to what you did. I thought it was really interesting where you went with it, which even though you highlighted some of the same things I'm going to highlight, you went in a totally different direction with it. And so, well done.
Thank you. All right. Who's
All right.
up next?
I guess it's me, isn't it?
It's you.
Yeah, so like I said, I was wondering where Michael was going to go, and I had no idea what I was going to do with this, the circus. And like Michael said, the article itself didn't draw you specifically. So I thought of a few things originally, like the difference between, circuses and carnivals. What's the difference between the two? And I remember I've only been to the circus once as a kid, and I hated it. It was just an awful experience in general. And then I thought about, how many kids hate the clowns? They just, and I remembered from somewhere how the clown seems to often appear in the alien abduction scenario, that so many who talk about that experience bring in the clown into that experience. So I started looking deeper. I thought, well, that's not where I want to go. And of course, a circus in our term is meant to represent like a circle, something circular, a ring. And like the ring of Saturn, the ring of all of these different possibilities of what this ring is about. And of course, the person who is in charge of the circus is known as the ring master, right? The ring master. And they will always be wearing this, usually this red outfit. They look like a British grenadier from like the 1700s with the top hat. Of course, that exact look of the 1800s, the people who controlled everything kind of had this disappearance, and that's how the ring master, who is the master of ceremonies, right? But that was the term, ring master. Okay, so I went into that, but then I decided let's go I brought that up because that's things you might want to talk about if it wasn't in your presentations that you might find interesting. But I went to two places because really a circus in its original name, that's a Roman name, right? And it comes from the Circus Maximus. And I'll just, I better screen share these for people so that we can just, for anyone who doesn't know what I'm talking about. Let me just find that little article or my little folder, which I called Circus. Yeah. So I will do a screen share right there and share. Is it working? I think it is. So this was the Circus Maximus in Rome. And anything that was oval, had an oval shape like this, and they claim, of course, was used for chariot racing or for various gladiatorial combat, but usually chariot racing. And this is the most famous of them. I think the Circus Maximus held 60,000 or 80,000 people or something. But there were, like Rome itself had a number of them, and every Roman city would have a Circus Maximus. And then here's another one, if I can. I guess I can't easily scroll ahead because of where this little thing is. There it is. So another version, another view of the Circus Maximus. And so to me, that's the first word. When I think of circus, of course, as a historian, it's the Circus Maximus in Rome. And of course, we don't really know what was going on in the Circus Maximus. And for anyone who's never been, I had a really weird experience at the Circus Maximus, like bizarre, when I went to it in Rome when I did my examination there. But when I started thinking about it, because there's two pieces. One is the oval shape itself, which can link to the middle part of the Vesica Piscis, right? So when you lay the two circles on top of each other, you get the vesica pieces and you get the considered in sacred geometry, the place of creation. So I'm wondering if something that's going on in there is representing this creative energy, this creative force. But to me, so I thought, okay, let's take the Circus Maximus isn't like the Colosseum. So most sports stadiums always look like the Roman Colosseum, right? When you see the Colosseum and you see a more modern sports stadium, there's only one sports stadium in the world that kind of looks like the Circus Maximus. And that's not the ringleader, that's this, right? That was the original Soldier Field in Chicago before they made the changes to it. And it has this much more elliptical look to it. And of course has the gigantic Roman Greek structures that had no reason to be a part of a football stadium in the 1920s. But you're looking in the background there, that's what became the Field Museum, supposedly where all the items from the Chicago World's Fair went to. But the Soldier Field is just such a strange thing because first time I ever saw it, it looked like the Circus Maximus. Like it couldn't, I mean, that's what it is. Either they really did build it and they wanted it to be an exact copy of it for whatever they were doing in Chicago, or it's Roman, it's ancient Rome. And again, this idea, there's a better view of it when they put auto racing in there. So they had auto racing at times, of course, in Soldier Field. But it's the whole look of it. It's telling you ancient Rome. It's telling you ancient Rome. So for me, when I hear the word circus, is how does the place that has this Circus Maximus turn into the circus run by this guy with a bunch of elephants and a flamethrower and somebody tightrope walking and clowns and jugglers and whatever? Why does that word get transferred? And when I try to look for the what's it, etymology, I can never say the word right, where the place where words come from, I couldn't find it. Yeah, I couldn't find it. How does it go from representing a place of chariot racing in this place where chariot racing happens in Rome to the thing we think of as the word circus, which happens in the late 1700s, early 1800s, again, right at this weird time we're all looking into of like something goofy happens in the world that seems to reset the whole thing. And again, the circus is a part of this whole reset period. So I took that into the first place as I went with it. I can stop my screen share here because I don't need a screen share anymore. If I can figure out how to get this back being large again.
Try stop screen share and then start it again sometimes when it's not.
Yeah, the problem is it's like I'm having it actually, oh, there it is, your screen sharing, stop share, yeah. So the other place that I wanted to look into this was, okay, since I don't really want to talk about the modern circus per se, and this whole idea that I read in the article that Michael was talking about, we've lost this great place where people come together and have these wonderful togetherness experiences, like they did nothing else but go to the circus, like they didn't have their own carnivals and their own fairs and their own gatherings by the lake and their own, of course they did, But for me, at that period of time when I was a kid, you either went to the circus. The closest thing for me to the circus from a standpoint of a truly entertainment spectacle that included sports, that was the Harlem Globetrotters. And one of the greatest things for me was that I got to see the Globetrotters when I was like, I don't know, 8 years old or something. So I got to see, I think Meadowlark Lemon was gone, but Curly Neal was still there, Geese Osby. And it was, for me, it's so interesting because I learned later that what the Harlem Globetrotters were doing, maybe they didn't realize what they were doing, but in the ancient temples of Egypt and Greece and Rome, they would perform sacred games. There would be sacred sporting performances put on. Now, partially sport was part of the temples because it was meant to keep those on the spiritual search physically and mentally fit. But they would put on these, they call them, and they would be like sporting events for the public. But they were not competitions. It was not like two teams playing against each other. There would be like in Egypt, there'd be one team would be Horus, represent, and one team would represent Set. So of course, Horus would always win. The good would always defeat Set, and this would become a teaching tool for the population that the game was being played, but an entire mythology was being presented within the game itself. That what they were seeing from the skill part of the interest in the game was not as important as the message that was coming. And for me, I mean, could I remember the score of the game the Harlem Globetrotters are watching? No, of course the Globetrotters won. They beat the Washington Generals by whatever they won by, but I still remember some of the things the Globetrotters did. I still remember some of the jokes they did, some of the games they played. I still remember Curly Neal sinking one from center court, and there was this whole dynamic of a spectacle that what is so I'll end this with a question of like this. What is the spectacle that the standard circus wants to present? When you left from going to the circus, when we're talking about this article, what is it that you might say the person's mind is being programmed to think, compared to something like someone goes to watch a regular sporting event where two teams are in combat battling against each other? What do they take out in their mind after going to watch that event? What do they come across from watching the Harlem Globetrotters, from which they already know the end result? They know in a sense, who's going to win before they get there. And they know that the game doesn't matter. It's all about entertainment. And it's all about, are you going to leave there having enjoyed your experience or feeling something different? So that's where the circus thing took me. And let's see where that takes you.
All right, who responds first? I guess okay. So, all right. So the first thing, when you started with circus and circle, right? It made me think immediately of this thing that I like, both for the music presented, right? But also I think there's something more going on in terms of like a ritual, right? There's this group from France called Circle that throws these dance music, electronic music events at historical sites and what we would consider like Tartarian or mud flood kind of buildings. And then now, since the lockdown, when they're not having audiences, they do them at like natural sites and things like that, right? But Michael and I did one particular episode of Project Kids where we focused in on one circle set by this gentleman here named Boris Brejcha. So this is Boris Brejcha. He's played a couple of times from Circle. This is one at the Fontainebleau, and this is the Grand Palais, right? But this is like really close to a modern day sort of circus. And if you actually look at the shape of the building, even though it's enclosed, it does have that sort of oblong shape that you were showing with their circus. And we watched, so, Michael and I did an episode all about this guy who's very interesting, right? But I also did some stuff on this at my conspiracy cocktail, and we watched this whole set. We used it for music, we danced, we had a good time, but we literally watched all kinds of interesting alchemical and magical things happen in that building over the course of the set, right? And he has what looks like the moon, but is sort of a ball, which we see that in the circus with the seal with the ball on his nose. It's like right there in the middle, and he sort of wears this thing, and he's the DJ, which is same thing as being like the ringmaster, right? Like kind of thing. He's controlling the sounds and the stuff like that people are going to hear and experience. And then when you were talking about the Vesica Pisces, I was just rolling down through this circle, and I have all sorts of theories about what Circle is doing and what Circle really is, but it is this sort of modern day representation of the circus, which I'm going to get into a little bit in my presentation. But I found this one logo that they used for Boris Brejcha at Grand Palais for Circle. Look at this. It's not too far off from some of the alchemical sigils that go along with Vesica Pisces. And of course, there's something that looks almost like the Batman symbol embedded in there, which Michael and I have spoken quite a bit about in a lot of our presentations and whatnot, right? And so that came up when I just happened to look up Boris Brejcha for Circle at the Grand Palais. And he's obviously like, I don't know, but like if I were like, this is adults go to this, but like if I were a kid and I saw that looks like it's from it's Carnival in Rio, where he gets a lot of his inspiration from. But this is the kind of shit that might have given me nightmares if I saw this at the circus when I was a kid, right? So it's kind of an interesting sort of play on that. So I had that, and then the Circus Maximus that you showed, and then you showed it was interesting to look at that shape, which was much more like lengthy than you think of the average sports stadium, right, or the circus, which is now circular and with a top on it, right? But there was one picture when you went to Soldiers Field that was from up above, and it reminded me, not necessarily in shape, but in sort of vibration that it gave off, of what it looks like if you look at the Burning Man camp from above. It does look like some sort of piece of like computer board technology or some kind of weird like energetic sigil that is acting like it has some sort of frequency raising up off of it that reminded me of Burning Man. And then you talked about how did it go from being this big thing to being like the circle with the ringmaster. And there was a part of the article, let me even see if I can find the part of the article really quickly, where it talked about the consolidation of a lot of stuff into one, like, 4-hour show. Where is it? There's this whole, I can't find it right now, but there is a part of the article where it talked about consolidation, and not only that, like all these separate families and groups that did circuses sort of became one business, but also this idea of taking as many weird things as you can find and compressing them into one space, right? That you then cover so it can't even actually be outside. You have some sideshows outside, but like all the really important stuff where everybody sits together and has the experience together is compressed into this small space, right? And if you look at the Vesica Pisces, like you showed, it's a couple of things, but that area in the middle that is compressed, that has parts of each shape in it, that's where the alchemy really happens. So everything got compressed or consolidated down into this little circle with the ringleader or the DJ or whatever sort of leading that kind of thing. And then I love that you brought up the Harlem Globetrotters, because I loved that when I was little too, right? And it's sort of like, the two things that came to mind is like Scooby-Doo, because you always know what the outcome's going to be. It's always going to be the same guy, right? They're always going to pull the mask off. Oh, it's the same guy. But then also on a certain level, with the way you were just like the way you were comparing it to this Egyptian thing, in some ways, the Harlem Globetrotters are another version of glass bead players, Michael, with the ball being sort of the bead, right? And they're sort of, the game never ends because they tour from city to city to city forever and ever and ever. There's never like they won the season and they're the champion or whatever. It's always just on to the next iteration of the story, where the way that the game goes will be a little different, but the outcome, right? It's all about sort of lessons, right? Like lessons and experiences and whatnot. And then, this, I think that when you asked about what the question, what was supposed to be the takeaway from the circus, right? And I think it was always for us to not be satisfied with our day-to-day life, right? And whether that be like a demoralization thing or an inspirational thing, because this talked about that the thing about the circus was that it was inspiring and blah, blah, blah. But think about this, like, the same stuff that, just so you know, 2 days ago, the Harlem Globetrotters asked to become an NBA franchise in an open letter. So there you go. I bet you didn't know that when you talk about that. Laura just brought that up. Laura's like a really good like sideshow over here with the research, right? Like interesting stuff. But this, like, think about.
Sorry, why are you just saying that? Don't forget the Harlem Globetrotters' key start of every game is the magic circle.
The magic circle. And this not satisfied. Let's still think about it. When we see something amazing, like we both are inspired by it and we want to be that, but it also creates a lot of self-hatred when we aren't able to live up to it, right? Or like when, as the farther things get away from the circus, the more that becomes like just a faint memory and we're not striving after that anymore. So I think it's this weird process, this weird alchemical ritual that they love to put us through, and that use something wonderful to create something miserable, right? Like use something that should be inspiring to demoralize, like conflate those two things, right? Like into one big package, right? And so that you're constantly in this like soup of like exhilaration and misery, right? Like those are the two things. If you think about like, like American culture, it's like the meth and the come down, right? Like the circus is kind of like that. You're up super high. And then I think if you read stories about these kids who like to run away and join the circus, like they talk about the first time they went to the circus, it was so exciting. And then after that, they were so sad because the circus was gone and whatever, right? It's that high and low, the high and low, and really taking away like this stable middle, right? Kind of thing. So anyway, that was my response to your stuff. Michael?
All right, Howdie, that was fascinating. And it lots of like food for thought, if you will, and a whole bunch of things like popped in my head as you were talking. And one of the ways which I always like to describe what it is that we do here, like the three of us, is I always think of this as like a high wire act. like, because you don't know what you're going to do. And so it's like, you know, we're recording it in real life, in real time. And so I was like, oh, hi, why? I say that, I've said that in earlier shows. And so it's like, I was like, okay, the circus symbology seems to keep on playing. So I also began, when I first read it, I was thinking about the comparing and contrasting circuses versus carnivals, and like particularly the circus being like the very co-opted sort of corporate takeover of the carnival. And the carnival you're walking, I mean, just that whole thing, I resonated with that sort of comparison and contrast as well. But like, I love where you brought in the you know, the Egyptian and the Roman aspects, because I'm not particularly well versed in it, so that was really good. And when you're talking about the sacred games, and sacred games are part of, like, you know, a lot of cultures, sacred games, and like what they are. And particularly use the battle of, what was it, Horus and Set was in this example. And so I'm assuming like there's a certain level of, like, you know, of soul play in this play, you know, of like the battle of the soul. And, you know, we can see that in a lot of different ways. And then thinking about the co-opting of the Roman circus sort of thing, and like soul and soldier field, and like that those two words have always played, have always been something in my mind, like the soul and the soldier, like how that plays along with it. But there's that. And then the Harlem Globetrotters, like you're so, that's such a potent sort of like contemporary, like relatively contemporary sort of like piece in our like North American sort of history of what they did, and the role they played, and the fact that they kept on playing that same game over and over again. They always won, and there was something else. And I tend to agree with you. I hated the circus as a child. I even brought my children to a circus, and I hated it as an adult. I was like, what the hell was I even thinking? But the Harlem Globetrotters, like, I don't know anyone who has that sort of conflicted, even if they know how it's going to end up. Like, you know, there's something a little bit different about that. And it's funny that Emily brought up Scooby-Doo, because as soon as you said Harlem Globetrotters, I immediately went to Scooby-Doo as well. But not because, like, and I didn't think about it, the fact that every Scooby-Doo episode ends the same way, in the same way that every Harlem Globetrotter game ends the same way. It's the fact that the Harlem Globetrotters were regular special guests on Scooby-Doo. Like, Scooby-Doo always would have, not always, but like that was always special when you get like the special guest. And it was always the friggin' Globetrotters. So it was like there, you know, at every level, there's a little bit of connection with that. So it's like all of that was, you know, I'm listening to this, my mind's popping, I'm enjoying all of that. But then when you brought up the image of the ringmaster, and so in the article, it talked about Elysian. Am I pronouncing that correct? Elysian Fields. And, you know, that's within like the Greek mythology. And it's kind of like a heaven, I suppose, like this afterworld, and like the Titans rule it. And so one of the, and you brought up also the whole sort of Saturn thing. And so, like, doing a little bit of my research, I saw that, like, you know, one of the rulers or supposed rulers, depending upon who you read, of Elysian Fields was Kronos, and like just all of that sort of thing, like all of these sort of, it was popping in my mind. I'm like, I don't know where I'm going to go with it. But then I remember, and I'm going to share this with you guys. I remembered this thing, which I made. There was a period of time for 2 years. All I did was collage artwork. And the very, very last piece I made, and there are always these characters in these collage artwork. I'm going to show it to you. But the very last piece I made, it had a whole bunch of different characters. And my favorite character, and I never understood where. I always knew like what I was going to make, but like, I'm like, where's this coming from? I don't know. Was one of the ringmasters from a circus. So I'm gonna conclude this with the showing of this piece, which you can see that I made here in 2012. And
Wow.
And this all collage and cut paper. And this character right here, I never understood who he was. He was like, and in my mind, when I made this character, the Green Man, but is pregnant. Green Man kept on showing up in all of these artworks, but this is the only time it showed itself as female. And with like, you know, the pregnant belly. I remember making this, and it's like, I have to make it with a pregnant belly and like, you know, swollen breasts and almost in this birth kind of position. And then this was like, you know, in the fetal position in this sort of state, and it was connected to the umbilical cord. This was the symbolic umbilical cord. But behind this birth, which is happening right here, which is like, you know, being overseen by these guys and the snakes and the owls, was the sad man, was the sad 3-ring circus man. And like, you know, you see the expression on his face. But and I never understood. I still don't know like where that mode, what I was tapping into, you know, what the ringmaster was. But that was like, in my mind, when I created this piece, that was the most intriguing character in the artwork. So like after this conversation, you know, he gave me some more pieces, some crumbs to go into my own sort of inner journey to look at what was that about, you know, in hindsight, 10 years later. So thank you for that.
Hey, thanks for sharing. That was really interesting. And
Yeah.
one last thing came to mind when Emily was talking too was, again, Circle. That was the original name of the television show Lost. ABC didn't like that it was going to be called Circle and changed it.
Oh, that's very interesting. Okay. Yeah, I've talked about Lost quite a bit, and I think you have too in some of your videos, Howdie. I just wanted to quickly say 2 things before we go on to my presentation. Michael, when you showed that collage, if you actually look in there, all of the things, so it's almost like you got a precognitive or remote view into the future of the shows we would be doing over the last couple of weeks, including this one with Howdie, because the snakes are there, the owls are there, right? Like, you know, there's all sorts of things that are topics that we've been talking about, like, you know, symbolism, right? There's even a blue owl, like it's very interesting. So that was your snapshot of June of 2021 that you saw back in 2012. Right. So this is part of what we've been talking about, our gateway experiences and all of this kind of stuff. Right. Wow. That was interesting. And then just also Laura pulled this up from the Harlem Globetrotters Twitter account. And this is their statement. Official statement on NBA letter. As an organization whose storied history is already tightly interwoven with that of the NBA, the Harlem Globetrotters are looking for a long overdue seat at the table. Our players were instrumental in the integration of the league dating back to 1949. We stood proudly as our players were recruited by NBA teams. Now, after years of attracting the best Black players, it's time the NBA recognized our contribution to the game, which the league already considering an expansion. With the league already considering an expansion, the time has come. The Harlem Globetrotters stand ready to negotiate for a franchise. This sounds to me like 1619 Project, which is all about reframing things. I'm not even saying that there's truth to this thing about the Harlem Globetrotters as really like, you know, the slave contribution to America in a different way, and really focus on it. And that right, like it's very similar to what they're talking about with the 1619 Project. Like we want to reframe the way history has been told about this, and we want a seat at the table, like with no judgment about whether that's right or wrong. This blends into the article, all of the social programming we're having right now around critical race theory and reparations and things like that that are going on, right, to a certain extent. And so this is kind of a fascinating little snippet, and that you brought this in today, Howdie, I'm 100% certain, because I feel like I have a pretty good sense of you, that you had no idea this was going on in the background.
None.
Nope. Yep. So anywho, I thought that was interesting, and that Laura was able to pull that up. So anywho, and the Globetrotters would always wear all those very American looking things, right? Like the very other uniforms were various iterations of the flag and things like that, right? So that's kind of interesting. So, all right, on to me. Here we go. All right, so when Michael sent the article, I'm like, that looks interesting. And then I read the article, and my first thought was, this is an odd article and I don't like it. But somehow I managed to come up with several things. And then I was like, I both like it and don't like it, right? So I think part of, like, one of the things is like now our lives feel like a circus every day, right? Like it used to be life seems to be sort of humdrum. You went to school, you went to work, you played with your friends and blah, blah, blah. And wow, you go to the circus. Like now at least 10 crazy things happen every day, right? And so when people think about like having a special day away, they like want to go to the spa or to like the lake where very little happens, right? They don't want to see something amazing now when they're taking a break. They want like something very calm and relaxing generally, whereas it used to sort of, the way this article presents it, sort of being the opposite, right? Now, while the circus like it did provide this idea that anything is possible and that is now somehow this article is saying is gone, I don't think that's really true. Like we get that anything is possible thing today. It's almost oversold, but like in a dumb way, right? Like, you know, we get all these presentations of like, you know, not rational things to aspire to, right? Now, the difference is we don't go to some place and sit with other people to see it. We get it through our computer and through our television, right? But also like they want us to believe a bunch of stuff that is highly unbelievable and anything's possible. That's how people sort of rationalize some of the dumb things that they believe also, right? So this idea is still with us. It's just presented in a different way. There was an interesting conflation of the circus with political and social institutions and with George Washington. Like, so they tried to, like, you know, my thought when it was, you know, when it was saying that the circus was a political and social institution was like, this is racism, right? Like that seems to be all the discussion about that. But I thought it was interesting that got brought into it. Okay, so I think one of the things, I can't read what I can't read what this says anymore, but we still like to see those kinds of things, but we don't care if they're real anymore, right? So one of the things it talks about in there is that like everything at the circus is real, right? Like generally you didn't see a magician in the big top. There might be one of those out in the sideshow, but the stunts and the acrobatics that they were doing were real. Now we watch videos of people doing crazy stuff and like we don't actually care if it's real. If it's like special effects or whatever, like we seem to be like fine with that. Like people will pay tons and tons to go watch a movie where it's all special effects. It's not really humans doing it. So like we'd rather have the fake thing now because it's more exciting. Like not me personally necessarily, but as a culture, that's what's sort of been pushed. Let's see. Where I'm going to go, and I think part of the main focus of my thing, although I have some other points, is that this is a bullshit article in some ways to me, like other than that it comes from Les Standiford, right? When you sort of looked into his background, I'm like, okay, this makes sense on a different level. But this feels like almost an algorithmically produced article because they needed to seed certain phrases, certain Twilight language into the collective. And so they needed to have something to house it in. You can't just put quotes in that are nonsense in the newspaper and expect people to like engage it in a deep way. So the first statement that I thought was interesting was one of the same ones as you. To go from the lonely prairie or the dusty cornfield and come face to face with the amazing aggregation of worldwide wonders, wrote novelist Harlem Garland in 1899, was like enduring the visions of the apocalypse, a glittering river of Elysian splendors emptying itself into the tent. Huh? Like, what the fuck is that, right? So if you listen to the first part, there's the sentence, to go from the lonely prairie or the dusty cornfield and come face to face with the amazing aggregation of worldwide wonders. Okay, that's like a reasonable sentence about like that you're trying to make this sound interesting. It's then disrupted with wrote novelist Harlem Garland. And I suggest we dig into Harlem Garland sometime because Laura's been doing that over a year and it looks kind of interesting. Wrote Harlem Garland in 1899. So there's a break from the quote, the strange Twilight language, to bring in Harlem Garland and the date 1899. And then the quote starts up again and is complete Twilight language. Was like enduring the visions of the apocalypse, a glittering river of Elysian splendors emptying itself into the tent. All right, so there's a place in Los Angeles called Dodger Stadium. So here we are talking about stadiums again, sports stadiums. And it is in an area of Los Angeles known as Elysian Park or Elysian Fields, right? And one of the things that Dodger Stadium is used for when the Dodgers aren't playing, which is one kind of bread and circus, is this is where Cirque du Soleil is when they're in Los Angeles. They have their big tent in the parking lot at Dodger Stadium. Okay, so this is where Cirque du Soleil performs when they're in Los Angeles. All right, this is their Volta. The last one that they did, or Curio. I think those are the last two that they did before the pandemic happened. And then what we get also at Dodger Stadium is that became a place where they started doing the vaccines. My father got his vaccine at Dodger Stadium. To me, this is like an apocalyptic vision, right? You're going to Dodger Stadium where you used to watch baseball in the circus, and you're getting jabbed, seeing people with masks and all this kind of stuff, and getting jabbed. And then if you look at what some of this stuff looks like from above ground, it also brings up some of the stuff I was saying with the stadium and the Burning Man, right? Where they're creating patterns from above, like there's this sort of route that's being followed, like look at this one here, right? Like look at that. There's like almost like a figure eight kind of thing, right? That the cars are doing. So this is some kind of ritual, right? That ends in an injection. Like my dad and his girlfriend waited for hours in this car line, right? To, it gives all new meaning to the step right up, right? That you hear at the circus, right? But this is in Elysian Park or Elysian Fields in Los Angeles, which is near the Los Angeles River. So we have visions of the apocalypse, a glittering river of Elysian splendors emptying itself into the tent, right? I just thought that was kind of interesting. I thought there was, I'm going to go to another saying in just a second, but I'm just trying to stay in order in my notes so I don't lose track. The conflation of the railroad and the circus was kind of interesting because railroads come up over and over in some of the stuff that we talk about. This compression of the endless array of interesting things. We talked about that with Howdie. And I did think it was kind of like interesting how all of the big names in the circus eventually became one brand, just kind of like how Facebook bought up like Instagram and WhatsApp and all of this kind of stuff. And if you think about it, like we have our sort of circus and sideshow online now, like Facebook is arguably the circus, or maybe it's Instagram, and TikTok is the sideshow because it's like shorter little skits and whatever, right? So we have this social media circus, but the same thing happens. Everything gets compressed and consolidated. There's this, okay, so then there's this other quote in the article that I thought was really interesting as well. And it's this one down here where it says, all right, where is it? Radio became near universal, and film had progressed from moments-long diversions presented in arcades into gripping dramatic spectacles where audiences watched in air-conditioned comfort. Okay, that's reasonable. That's like a reasonable sentence. But then again, the sentence is interrupted with a date as early as 1925. Okay, as early as 1925, and then it goes into Twilight language. As seas were in fact parted, bushes did burn, and the dead rose to amaze or terrorize the living. Huh? Right? That's a pretty weird, that is Twilight language. And these are the kinds of language that are used to convey information, to pass intelligence, or to trigger assets, right? Just like we were talking about with Bob Ross with some of his sayings and whatnot. And what I noticed with both sentences is there's a setup sentence that the setup part of the sentence that makes sense. There's then a break in the sentence with a little phrase that also has a date attached to it, numbers, and then there's the Twilight language or the trigger code, right? And I've been noticing this thing with the date and the trigger language in a lot of things that I've been looking at, but I thought that was pretty interesting. Like literally, seriously, right? As seas were in fact parted, bushes did burn, and the dead rose to amaze or terrorize the living. Now, think about all of the things that have been going on like over the course of the last year, right? We've been in this lockdown. We talk about like the living dead. We have all these brush fires going on constantly, right? And the seas parting, like we talk about the Suez Canal, right? And like the thing being stuck in there and like that stopping, transit across one area. Like it's a pretty interesting statement, right? Like it's bizarre in its nature. So I thought that was kind of interesting in the way that this was being. So in my opinion, the article was mostly created to embed those two sentences or those two ideas. They needed something around that, right? And then I thought it was interesting that the writing was on the wall, that the circus was over in 1950, but they continued on for another 67 years, right? Like that's some, if the writing's on the wall and then you just keep pushing and pushing, why? What else is going on when the circus moves around? Like we talk about like, what is the real purpose of like, the tennis tour or the concert tours with bringing assets around as part of like human trafficking? Like what is human trafficking really about? Are there people with certain energies, vibrations, or nighttime jobs that need to be moved around from place to place? And then the other thing that came up is like, the circus isn't really gone per se. It's just been changed, right? So the first sign of that was Cirque du Soleil, which came around in the 80s, and it moved the circus from like something the whole community partook in and to something that was elitist in nature. Because I think even when Cirque du Soleil first started back in like the 80s or 90s, it's quite expensive. It wasn't like going to the circus for $5 or $10. Like now it's upward of multiple hundreds of dollars. I think the cheapest tickets you can get like on a Tuesday night is like $85, right? But if you want good seats and you want to go on the weekend and whatnot, you're in the $200, $300, $400 range. So the circus became somehow like sort of elitist and something like special. And then it also gave way to raves and music festivals where you have some of these similar kinds of things going on, but with the addition of high quality sound and music and drugs. It's more interactive as opposed to watching it, right? As opposed to watching it. And then Burning Man is, you can go to the circus at Burning Man. They have all these different camps and all these different like experiences you can have. And some of them are very circus-like in nature. And there's one particular act that I've always found interesting that got its birth at Burning Man and tours around at all these festivals. And it's called the Lucent Dossier Experience, which I think is like a very unusual name. I've talked about it before, but this is like circus sideshow freaks. They do their own performances outside of Burning Man. Like you see them at like Coachella and Lightning in a Bottle, right? And they basically, their performance interacts with the audience. It isn't like on a stage in front of you. Now they do their own shows, which I've never been to, which may be more like an audience looking at it. But from what I understand, you stand up there. So I think it is more interactive, and it always involves also dance music and some of the kind of like effects that you expect to see at like a rave or something like that. Then there was this comment about the circus held the nation spellbound. Did it really? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't really think it did. Like, maybe you went there and, there was little spells put on people and things like that. But like, not unless we are sort of like under some different spell than I think. Like I went to the circus a couple times. I didn't think that much about it. Maybe that programming didn't work on me because I had a different programming running or whatnot. But you do hear these stories about people who want to run away and join the circus. But this whole thing made me think of one thing, Michael. This whole idea of like this being put under a spell under the big top, right? So I thought of Big Top Pee-wee, right? Pee-wee Herman, Big Top Pee-wee. But then, Michael, do you remember several weeks back, we fell onto some woman named Siobhan Roberts, who wrote this article about Dan Coxeter, but she is also, she's a person who writes about art and technology for MIT, right? And we came to the conclusion that she's not a real person. And we also looked at her, she aspires to be a virtual reality game artist. And so we looked at, let me see if I can, I'm looking for it here. I pulled it up earlier. Let me see if I can find it. She aspires to be a virtual reality artist, and she has 7 pieces that she has submitted as like stuff that, that she wants to have people consider for her work. And this is one of them. So Michael and I came to the conclusion that this was not a real person, that this was somehow like some sort of AI introduction into our glass bead game to bring our attention to certain ideas, one of them being this image right here. And that is right? That's a circus, right? So she made this tent drawing on Photoshop for a game environment I made in college. That's the explanation of this, right? She has a few other little things here that Michael and I have talked about related to other things we've talked about as well. They all seem to attach to something that he and I have talked about in our show. So this kept coming to me the whole time we're talking about this, right? Then there's the idea, so I already talked about this a little bit, that the thing that's unique about the circus is that it's real. People are actually doing real stunts as opposed to like magic, which is an illusion or special effects. the loss of circus makes us a more lonely people. Like, really? Like, that's the thing that's making us more lonely. Like, I mean, he doesn't really bring this up till the end of the article, right? But it's like, I think of lots of things that like make me lonely, but not going to the circus isn't one of them. But I'll tell you one thing I've seen a lot about. I get emails all the time from the people who throw the underground warehouse parties and raves in Los Angeles, and all of them are talking about how lonely they've been with the shutdown and not having dance music events, right? Like, sure, they'll talk a little bit about like missing the music and blah, 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 but they mostly have talked about how lonely that they have felt since they didn't have that. I've been to probably 1,000 underground parties in my life. One of the things I always feel at the party, almost always, not always, is lonely, right? Like, I'm having this amazing experience with new sound and dancing and whatever, but I'm having trouble finding people to really connect to. So that was kind of an interesting, right, kind of thing. So the people who go to the underground warehouse parties, they're feeling lonely. Let's see, people do, okay, yeah, there's fewer opportunities to experience things as an audience together, right? Like, people don't go to as many movies, they don't go to shows and circuses and things like that, you know, because we watch everything at home. I don't really love that, but my impression is that most people don't actually care. So if they're lonely, they don't even know that they're lonely because they're very content with their, you know, new format bread and circus. So I think that's it for my sort of takeaway from that. Michael?
I will begin. First off, you, as always, you do not disappoint, Emily, bringing up lots and lots and lots of food for thought and interesting perspectives of the story. And this is my opinion, like, you know, the reason why I think that this is like, you know, content worth watching is like all of these different ways we can look at the same thing in all of these different sort of paths, and just even like the flexibility of like, you know, where something can inspire us. So I just want to throw that out there. What really kind of caught my attention, or really what you said, was when you started talking about the Dodger Stadium, and you know, we did the jump from basketball. Well, I guess, like, you know, if all of this begins with the Coliseum, you know, if that's where we're going to say this begins, and then like how that has shown itself, particularly within our sports, you know, modern North American professional sports, Soldier Stadium, and then we talked about the whole Harlem Globetrotters, and you went to Dodger Stadium, linked it to the virus and all that stuff. And it's in the neighborhood of Los Angeles known as, what is it, Elysian Fields? Is that the neighborhood?
Elysian Park or Elysian
Park,
Field.
right.
Yeah.
But that's where it gets its name from. And so where do we want to go right here? Let me pull this up. Baseball. Like, you know, I've done research into the origination of baseball, and I kind of I demystify what's known as the Abner Doubleday myth for the invention of baseball, or at least, you know, the mainstream story. And, you know, there seems to be like a lot to that, but I'm not the first person who's done that. And if you look at like more mainstream baseball historians, what they do is they're like, no, Doubleday isn't where like modern baseball began. Modern baseball began at this one particular game, or this one particular field in Hoboken, New Jersey on June 19th. On June 19th, 1864 or 46, something like that. And that is called Elysian Fields. So Elysian Fields is the birthplace of like, you know, like we could look at it in different ways, but that's definitely part of the historical record. And we've got this June 19th sort of thing. And this makes me crazy. This makes me so crazy. The articles nowadays, internet articles, particularly if it happens within the last week, if you go and you pull it up, they don't tell you the date it was released. They tell you how many days ago it's been released. So if you go and you pull up the day, so what it says right now is that article, which we're making reference to, it was published, not released, was 4 days ago. Mm-hmm. You know what that is?
June 19th.
It was June 20th.
June
So it was
20th.
written June 19th. It went through, but it all lines up to June 19th. And we linked
Right.
on that over and over again. So I want to throw that June 19th. I want to talk about the Elysian Fields. I want to say thank you for your presentation. And that was the feedback and the contribution, which I wanted to add to what you had to share before we move on to the free talk portion of our show. Howdie, the mic is passed to you.
Yeah, Emily, that was really interesting. Actually, there's a lot of, particularly going through the quotes. I thought the bringing up the quotes in the article, because Michael talked about the one of them, but that you shared both of the quotes. They are, yeah, they, once you look at them more carefully, they're so strange. From the standpoint of what does that have to do with circuses at all to start with? And it's this question of, yeah, this idea that the circus was all real, that you were watching, you weren't watching any trickery. There was nothing, the elephant was really standing on its back legs. The person was really, you never saw the person walking on the high wire and think, I don't think they're really walking on a high wire. I think they've got a giant path there and the wire's just, fake. That we really believed that they could fall and die. You know, that was something we really actually thought could happen, right? So there was this element of, like, I'm just sort of thinking back now, this realness. There was always this sense of danger. Remember, the part of the circus is the person putting his head in the lion's mouth. And so there's always this element of real danger. Something bad could happen at the circus. Well, it didn't, but it could. And it was almost like this from when you were talking, this sort of, it's totally different from the magic show. We don't go to a magic show and think the woman being put in the box, anything's going to happen to her. We're never worried about the woman. But there was this, going back to the question I asked you about what do people take away? Obviously, especially when you're young, if you think the guy's head might get bitten off by the tiger or the lion, anxiety's already part of your experience.
So
and I thought of that.
So just quickly, so like there's that anxiety and the fear, which the fear state is really good for programming, right? And here we have some very complex language in those, it's complex Twilight language in the article, but think about certain sayings that we know as associated with circus, like step right up. There's phrases that no matter when you went to the circus, whether you went to the circus 100 years ago or 10 years ago, phrases that you've always heard. Like that, maybe open up some sort of compartment for whatever the experience is going to be. And if you're at all familiar, like, have you ever looked into, and I know Michael and I've talked about this, but like, did you ever listen to what Sheriff Moose said in his press conference when they were looking for the snipers in Washington, D.C.? Like, right? Like he read this whole weird thing that sounded just like those sentences, right? Sounded almost exactly like those sentences. And then there's also, and this one is more personal, when we were doing a digging into some of my background, there's this very weird summer camp near the Boeing facility that I went to when I was a kid. And when I was trying to dig up information on the person on the summer camp and the person who owned the summer camp, in his obituary, which my dad helped me find, right? There was some language exactly like that as well. Almost like the kids who were part of that MK program were going to go looking for the information. And when they found it, something would be triggered to kind of take them off the path and back into their la la land kind of stuff, right? It's the similar, almost the exact same kind of language, like the reference to things, some things in nature and this sort of like airy language around it, right? In a quotation mark. It's fascinating. But that trauma that you're talking about, like that creates, I mean, think about, we hear about like satanic ritual abuse, obviously, but also early MK Ultra stuff where they would literally physically torture people before they mind controlled them. It got more smooth as things have gone on. And now you can get people to sort of, like love their mind control in a different way. But to me, this is the same procedure. Like he was trying, like Moose was trying to call back the sniper, right? And he read this phrase, and then shortly thereafter that, everything was kind of tied up, right, Michael? Is that how it happened?
Well, I think it's really interesting that you brought up the Moose thing, because it's we're talking about this article kind of like independent. And when we put it in like a little bit of context, or at least a comparison, we're like, oh, okay, we're starting to see this. Like when you stop back, if you stop and you look at this article and you think about it, just like what we've done, is like, it doesn't make any, it adds on the surface, it adds no value, and it makes no sense. Yet at the same time, it was written and then picked up by Drudge. So it's like you're either, what is the logic is the question. And so the logic which we're hitting, I was like, yeah, there's either it was for us to have this conversation, or it was to go and wake up the sleeper, or it's one and the same. We are the sleeper being woken up by the language. Who knows? But it is fascinating.
Yeah. Yep. Anything else, Howdy? Sorry, I kind of cut it.
No, I think that was, those are the things that popped to mind as a sort of the key things that I was focused on when you talked. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think this was like another super interesting one, right? Like, it's just the part that's so fascinating to me about this is like, there's all of these articles every day, and we could literally jump into every article and do this, right? And think about, like, people go through, like, my dad reads the newspaper and now he reads it on his phone every day. He's just taken on all this programming, right? Without, or all of these ideas without stopping to examine any one of them in the way we've just examined this one. In the period of time we've done this show, he's read the whole newspaper and just taken on all that programming with no sort of debate or discussion or midrash about it, right? And
then he goes and feeds the squirrels.
And then he goes, feeds the squirrels and takes pictures of the birds charging on the wire and all that stuff right there.
Well, one of the things is, does it always, I don't know if this is the case, but do we always bring it back to the CIA? Is that almost, or has this only been 2 episodes that have gone back to the CIA?
I don't think the first one did.
The first one we didn't, okay. But we definitely did the last one. We definitely did the last one.
But you know what? Since we have a couple minutes here, let me update on some of our previous things that we've done. Just so you know, Jeff sent me a tweet the other day from the Mayflower autonomous ship that it ran and it malfunctioned. And let me see if I can. Where's my phone? You have my phone over there, right? It malfunctioned. And let me see if I can find the exact tweet so I read it to you correctly. All right, where's Jeff? Jeff is there. This was like, I just had to laugh when it was sent. So he's a Twitter, he finds everything on Twitter. So where is it? All right, there's not that. Here it is. Our planned recovery vessel has arrived. After a few checks, we'll head back to base. I'm safe, as you can see. My computer systems are working fine. Thanks to everyone for their support while we figure out this mechanical hitch and get turned around. So the AI captain of the Mayflower autonomous ship has his own Twitter account. So that is an AI tweeting that out. And he hashtagged it MAS 400.
And what that's the Mayflower. What date did it come out?
So this tweet was on, let's see what's happening. Oh, what's interesting. Is it not there now? Let's see. Let me click on it again. There we go. Here we go. So the date that June 21st.
Okay. So that was probably the day it came out. So we're back to this whole like June 20th, June 19th, June in that thing.
Which is we're stealing summer solstice, right?
Ah. Very interesting. Okay. So
does it say where the boat was when it had its I mean, I guess I could pull that up right now, but I'd be curious where it was on the journey.
I'm not sure, but it looks like it was, it was mid-ocean, right? Like it wasn't near any can you look that up real fast while I say the next one? Looking up, where did the Mayflower autonomous ship have its problem? Okay, so then the next one is when we did our, I think it was the Bob Ross one, and we started talking about Muncie, Indiana, right? Yep. So somebody sent me a video and an article. Michael, somebody was found dead in a water tank in Muncie, Indiana, just like the Elisa Lam thing. There's a gentleman who 2 years after his death, there's been no further findings. Right, he was found dead in the water tank in a water treatment facility, right? And it was bizarre. It was almost exactly like the Elisa Lam story. And we've talked about the Elisa Lam story as some kind of, alchemical ritual or some sort of code or test for whatnot. But I found it fascinating that this place that has like who's ever heard of Muncie, Indiana, really? But there was all this crazy stuff going on there, including the angel, right? Elisa Lam happened in Los Angeles, and this guy was in Muncie, where there was that angel kind of over the thing. But like the story is basically the same. Like it makes no sense, right? In the water tank, you know, at the water treatment facility, right? And so I thought that was interesting that like the place we talked about had that thing go on there. Right, this very sort of interesting, you know, and the Elisa Lam case was this induction into one level of the augmented reality game, and there was this other one. So that I thought that was fascinating. That was some feedback I got from people. Okay, so it looks like the voyage. Okay, so the voyage began at around 4 a.m. local time on June 15th from Plymouth in the UK, after the team had worked with IBM's The Weather Company, studying weather patterns to identify the best window for the voyage. After 2 days, the Mayflower had covered more than 250 nautical miles in its 3,800-mile voyage. Observers reported the vessel was averaging just over 3 knots, and the public was invited to monitor and see live data and images in an online dashboard. Where's the problem? Where did they run into a problem? Let's see.
Well,
I guess
at
it's
2 days.
over.
Yeah, it's over. Yeah.
They didn't. Okay.
They
So
only
I see. Here it
It
is.
didn't work. After
only-
3 days, it stopped working and they returned back to Plymouth. Somehow we stopped it.
We stopped it. 3 days into its historic voyage, attempting to become the largest autonomous vessel to cross the Atlantic, project organizers are reporting that the Mayflower has experienced a small mechanical issue, that they are stopping the voyage. Really, if it's a small mechanical issue, why are we stopping the voyage unless there's something else going on? We decided not to force the ship to continue, as what's broken is easy to fix at the moment. Our team is on their way to get the ship, and the Mayflower is waiting.
Can we figure out though, what I'm curious, what like specific day? Like I was just looking at those articles also. It's like not clear what that timeline is. So it left on the 15th of June.
Left on the 15th. Okay, so the recovery team reached the vessel on the 21st. So that's when it reached the vessel, right? But it says here, initial updates on June 18th only said that there was a small malfunction, but the vessel would be taken back to base to investigate, and they hope to restart the voyage shortly.
So the 18th is when it malfunctioned, when something's.
The recovery team reached the vessel on the 21st. So it
But
looks
the
like
malfunction happened on like the 18th or 19th. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, so something happened. And then, so like, right, like in the same sort of window, like that's wild to hear that. And like all of the stuff we're saying the Mayflower up to 2.0 represents.
Yeah.
Only 250 nautical miles off of Plymouth.
So it had only gone 250 miles,
250 miles.
nautical miles, of the 3,800 that it was supposed to do. So it would just be interesting to go and see what else was going on in the Bill Gates jab, all that kind of ritual on both on the 15th, the 18th, and the 21st, because the op on a certain level is collapsing. It's accelerating on another level, but right. So it would be interesting to see if there was like a malfunction at the same time, something else was sort of going wrong and controlling the narrative.
I'm gonna have to wrap my head around. I want to think a little bit more about the fact that it lasts only 250 days or 250 miles, because you know they've been working on that for like well over a year with the brightest and the smartest, and like you know.
Yep. All right, guys. Anything else before we go? Any final thoughts?
No, again, something similar to like what Michael was saying. I was so, again, every time we do one of these, even though when I get the article, I'm like, oh my God, what the hell am I gonna talk about? You know, when I first read it, always, it's like this can go nowhere. And then we get together and it always goes somewhere. It's one of these things that kind of makes me think it would be really interesting, you know, as an author, right? I always write all my books alone. It would be so interesting to write the next book with like 5 or 6 different people, you know, where there's one topic, and then each person has chapters in the book where you can take it, everybody can take the basic premise and move it in different directions. So you have little tiny books inside one big book, all written on one topic. It's taking me in that possibility, what we're doing here.
Yeah, I like that idea, right? Rather than just people putting out their own book, their own theory on something, like have a conglomerate, you know, sort of like like sort of workshop it out, but in the book, so people can get, you know, one of the things that we often hear about is like, oh, well, if you follow this person's work, you're just getting one point of view and da. That's been the old like paradigm of how like we receive information, is like articles come from one author, maybe sometimes two, who usually agree with each other, right? But having all of these different perspectives, no one can say that you were like in a vacuum, right? Or that one person's thought bubble. It would be like a really well thought out kind, and then it would be what people think after reading it. And then, it just extends out much further. It makes the information more omnidirectional instead of linear. It's pretty cool. All right, guys. Well, this is always fun. And I look forward to our next round next month, which Howdie will be the great decider. Before we let everybody know what you got going on right now and where they can find you. Michael, go ahead.
You can always find me at susquehannaalchemy.com. That's the best place to go.
Howdie.
So far, I'm still sitting with Howdie McCoskey Talks on YouTube, but I'm moving as well over to Free Voice as well, so I can start being a little more open and not have to censor myself, you might say. So that I'll be on 2 platforms soon.
Awesome. And you guys can find me at Emily Moyer on YouTube or emilycmoyer.com. We will see you guys next month. Have a good one. All right.